Let's begin with a structural overview. Welcome to another lecture. Today we consider Alan Jackson, an American country singer-songwriter whose career, to some extent, functions like a long experiment in holding a musical constant while the industry's variables fluctuate around it. I'm Alexei, and we shall try to be precise without losing the melody.
Hi everyone, I'm Priyanka. I'm excited and a little curious about how a voice so traditional could stay so relevant for so long.
To frame our discussion, Alan Jackson is best known for neo-traditional country. That is to say, a return to core instrumentation such as fiddle and pedal steel, straightforward rhythm sections, and narrative ballads that obey country music's classical grammar. If you will, imagine restoring a 1970 Chevelle SS 396 without bolting on a spoiler. You polish the chrome, you do not redraw the blueprint.
Maybe the best place to begin is by asking a simple question. When we say neo-traditional, is it mostly about the instruments, or is it also about the kind of stories the songs tell?
It's important to understand that it is both signal and syntax. The timbral palette, fiddle, steel, acoustic guitar, acts like an established set of variables. The storytelling, work, faith, family, small-town memory, provides the recurrence relations that generate meaning over time. Empirically, we observe this in chart performance and longevity metrics. Jackson's catalog delivers 35 #1 singles on Billboard's Hot Country Songs and multi-platinum albums, which suggests that adherence to tradition did not preclude widespread adoption. Culturally, the effect is observable in ritual participation. Grand Ole Opry membership in 1991 and Country Music Hall of Fame induction in 2017. Which are institutions that endorse continuity as much as novelty. Moving forward, why should we care? Because genres drift, tastes cycle toward pop gloss and back toward roots. Jackson's body of work supplies a control group for modern country. He preserved the older sounds on the radio dial while reminding audiences that those sounds could still win awards and sell. Misunderstandings persist, however. Some hear neo-traditionalism as anti-progress, when in fact it functions as preservation plus selective innovation. He will, for example, vary lyrical themes or collaborate widely, yet keep the steel and fiddle in the frame.
So, moving on. Can we list a few grounding facts? I think that helps.
Certainly. First, the quantitative headline. More than 75 million records sold worldwide, 44 million in the United States, with 35 #1s among 66 charting songs. Second, a biographical pivot. He grew up primarily on gospel, and in his late teens shifted decisively toward country, absorbing Gene Watson, John Anderson, and Hank Williams Jr., which explains the blend of devotional calm and honky-tonk realism in his phrasing. Chronologically, 1989 marks the professional inflection. He became the first artist signed to Arista Nashville, leading to his 1990 debut album, Here in the Real World. And in 2017, he entered the Country Music Hall of Fame, inducted by Loretta Lynn, which is institutional confirmation of long-run influence. A brief personal note, as it were. When I first heard Where Were You, its restraint impressed me. Harmonically simple, lexically modest, and yet the function was maximum. Emotion with minimal ornament. Mathematically, one might say the song optimizes meaning per word. It is a reminder that elegance is not the enemy of power.
Building on that, I think the next thing we should talk about is the bigger questions behind his career. Like, how did his traditionalist stance actually change the field? And what would have happened if he had stayed away from that lane?
This logically leads us to question one. What is the measurable and perceived impact of Jackson's traditionalism on country music? Consider the production partnership with Keith Stegall, initiated after an impromptu 1986 television performance. Over 19 albums, they constrained the sonic space to clean vocals, sturdy songcraft, and the centrality of fiddle and steel. In other words, by minimizing the delta between stage and record through use of the Strayhorns, his road band, he built a reliable aesthetic that listeners could anticipate and trust. Beyond studio method, there is the symbolic politics. For example, in 1999 on the CMA stage, he interrupted his own set to sing George Jones's Choices, protesting a shortened slot for a legend. In 2000, with George Strait, he cut Murder on Music Row, a critique of pop drift that nonetheless succeeded without a standard single release. Consequently, these gestures, paired with hits like Chattahoochee and Livin' on Love, taught the market that reverence for tradition and commercial momentum were not mutually exclusive. Rolling Stone once framed his live approach as more human than spectacle, and that distinction influenced expectations for authenticity on major tours.
I'm curious about how that translates to newer artists. Can we say that his approach directly shaped who got opportunities? Or is it more like a soft influence through example?
In simpler terms, both signal and echo. Directly, he platformed younger, traditional-leaning performers. For instance, his 25th anniversary Keepin' It Country tour in 2015 featured John Party and Brandy Clark as special guests, a pairing that at minimum signaled to promoters and audiences that neo-traditional textures remained viable in arenas. Indirectly, his catalog proves that the core language of country, steel, fiddle, narrative economy, can still cross from core fans to mainstream listeners, so programmers and A&R departments retain a live template for how to work such records. The result is not a monoculture. Rather, Jackson's presence keeps a lane open when cycles tilt pop-heavy. Next, let's explore a counterfactual. In 2006, Jackson released Like Red on a Rose, produced by Alison Krauss. It leaned towards soft rock and adult contemporary textures. Critically praised, yes. Commercially, less so among his base, and he soon recalibrated with Good Time in 2008. Now, suppose the detour had become a massive hit. First, success alters incentives. Had the album exploded, label and radio feedback loops might have encouraged a permanent or prolonged pivot, potentially attenuating his role as a standard-bearer for fiddle and steel on radio. Second, the semiotics of his brand, guardian of tradition, as reinforced by the 1999 CMA protest and Murder on Music Row, would have blurred. Future statements defending tradition might have carried less weight if his own sound had migrated toward adult contemporary long-term. Third, market ecology. A weakened traditionalist pole alters what programmers treat as center of gravity, possibly narrowing the lane for contemporaries pursuing roots-pure projects in the late 2000s.
Maybe it's just me, but I wonder how fans would have reacted over multiple albums in that softer style. Is there a point where exploration becomes, betrayal? Or do people adapt if the songs are good enough?
We can infer from 2006 that elasticity exists, but it is not infinite. Fans license the one-album experiment due to accrued trust. However, identity salience is high in country, and Jackson's identity is bound to neo-traditional signifiers. If a second and third consecutive project had abandoned those timbers, the posterior probability of attrition rises, not necessarily in total sales, but in the composition of his audience and in the authority of his traditionalist testimony. Artistic exploration is commendable. Yet, as in mathematics, when you change axioms, you also change the theorems you can prove. On to our next point. What is the future of neo-traditional country? Empirically, we observe survivability through diversification. Jackson's 2013 Bluegrass album topped the Bluegrass chart while reaching number 3 on country. His gospel collections sold robustly, with Precious Memories surpassing about 1.8 million units. This indicates that tradition thrives within niches and can surface to the mainstream when anchored by credible voices. In parallel, physical institutions matter. AJ's Good Time Bar, opened on Lower Broadway in 2016, embeds a living archive in Nashville's tourist and local ecosystem. Even after Jackson disclosed a Charcot-Marie tooth diagnosis in 2021 and later concluded live performances with a final concert in June 2026, the physical and recorded infrastructures he built persist.
To shift gears a bit, are new artists actually choosing the older sounds? Or is it more like a branding layer who is stepping into that lane now?
It is worth noting that lanes reopen cyclically. For instance, younger performers who toured with him, such as John Party, signal receptivity to steel and fiddle-forward production among newer audiences. Moreover, collaborative events like Forever Country in 2016, spanning multiple generations, normalize intergenerational handoffs. The sustainability question is not whether tradition will dominate, but whether it remains audible at the center. The evidence suggests yes, provided credible custodians keep cutting records and venues keep programming the sound. A concrete area for further research. Assemble a longitudinal data set of top country songs across 3 decades. Tag each track for instrumentation features: presence of pedal steel, fiddle prominence, acoustic dominance, and correlate with radio versus streaming breakouts. In simpler terms, measure how much steel and fiddle the hits actually contain and how that varies by platform and cycle. From that, we could test whether the Jackson template resurges predictably after pop-heavy intervals.
So I guess that kind of sums it up. A constant sound through changing markets, strong signals to protect the lane, and evidence that tradition adapts by finding new outlets.
To summarize, Alan Jackson's impact lies in demonstrating that neo-traditional country, fiddle, steel, and story, can achieve mainstream results without surrendering its grammar. We examined his influence and signaling power. We considered the counterfactual of a permanent stylistic pivot. And we asked what the next generation must do to keep the sound audible. For comparative study, investigate George Strait, a parallel case in equilibrium between tradition and scale. Thank you for listening. In conclusion, keep your ears open and your variables controlled, and the patterns will reveal themselves.
Thank you, and goodbye. Maybe that's something we can come back to later.